Thank you. Okay, again, any questions should just be posted in the chat. Okay, again, we're learning. And we'll just at the end say a parak tilim also with Achenu. Again, we're learning the schos of not of nishmas, well, for shalem for all chaylim, and specifically the ones in Eretz Yisrael, and for the matzav in the situation in Eretz Yisrael. But we're learning the zechar nishmas. Mordechai Chana Zechron Livracha ben Reb Chaim Yitzchak Zev, and Yehuda Shimon Zechron Livracha ben Yeshua Yosef Moshe, and Aryeh Zechron Livracha ben Yeshua Adam Zalman. And Hashem should have an aliyah. We should only hear Besudas Tovas. Okay, so we left off last week in the middle of the process of separating challah and how you separate challah. I think that's where we left off. So we had said that the proper way to separate challah is you make the bracha right before the separation. I think there was a little bit of confusion with that. So the best way to do it is you take the challah in your hand without separating. So basically, if you have a dough, and what you should do is grab onto the dough with your hand without detaching it, then make the bracha, and then pull it off. That would be the best way of doing it. So like this, it's immediately before the separating. And like we said last week, the tefillas should be said either before or after or both, but definitely not in between the bracha and the separation of the challah, right? There is no minimum amount. I don't remember if we discussed this last week or not, but there's no minimum amount to take off from challah. So it's any amount you take off is fine. Seems like the minig is to take about a kezayis, but if you're not going to burn it, some people don't burn the challah. What they do is they just, some people freeze it and save it to burn with the chametz. Some people just throw it out in the garbage. So if you do, you should wrap it up. But if you're going to throw it out, then make sure it's less than a kezayis, because you don't want to be throwing out a kezayis of challah, even though it's just dough, but you don't want to get involved with throwing out in the baltasha situation. So just make it less than a kezayis if you're not going to burn it. Now, best is to burn it. Okay, how burnt does it have to be? So basically, it has to just be burnt where it's not edible. So it doesn't have to be black all the way through and through. As long as it's something that nobody would eat, then it's fine. Meaning, again, what you're separating for challah has kedusha to it. We don't give it to kahanim nowadays because we're all tummy, but it does have kedusha to it. So since it has kedusha to it, therefore you have to make sure that nobody's going to mistakenly eat it, which is why it's best to burn it. That's the main reason to burn it, for no other reason. If you don't burn it, you throw it in the garbage, then somebody might end up taking it out of the garbage, or while you're waiting for it to you put it in the freezer, people freeze it, and then they labor the Pesach, somebody might open it and not realize that it's a Hafrashas Challa, etc., etc. So therefore, that's why the best way is to burn it. And the burnt doesn't have to be crazy burnt, just enough not that it's not edible. So if you have Yeshiva Bachim in the house, for them, their edible is a lot. They have a different barometer of what edible is. So I would say you have to make it even for them not edible, right? So that's basically how you should burn it. Now, if you're going to burn it, which is what most people do, don't take off too large a piece, because when you take off a very large piece, then it's harder to burn it, right? Because it's harder to get burned because it's such a thick piece. There is an eitzah that some say is to flatten it. I think we mentioned that last week. But but don't take such a big piece. And if you did take a large piece, once you take off that large piece, you can't put any of it back. The whole thing has kedusha to it. So therefore, you can't like say, "Oh, this is such a large piece. Let me put some back." That you're not allowed to do. Right? If you did it, then you ask a shaila, but you can't do that. Now, when you're burning it, and you want to burn it on the stovetop, so you should not put it directly on the stovetop, because since it has kedusha to it, it will the taste, the tam that comes out of the challah will go into the metal of the stovetop, and it's no different than cooking treif on your stovetop, and it will make the stovetop treif. The same thing with your oven. If you're going to burn it in the oven, if you put it directly on the grates, then it's going to make the grates treif. Again, it's not treif, but it's going to have truma, which Yisrael is not allowed to eat. Which I think most people don't put it on there anyways because it would get messy. So you got to put it on foil or do it in a pan, which I think most people again do it anyways. And it only has to be one layer. It does not have to be a double layer. Okay. If you've done it directly on the grates in the past, so Baruch Hashem, if you do it with the grates in the oven or the grates on the stovetop, so that can make a difference. But either way, if it's on the stovetop, then the next time you make something on the stovetop, the fire kashers it, so that's not a problem. Meaning theoretically, and you bring up a good point. Theoretically, you could put it onto the stovetop. But then the next time you cook something, just turn on the fire for 5 to 10 minutes, just so that it will kasher it, right? Meaning, if somebody puts something treif, this is why when people go away to hotels and they want to use if they go to like an Airbnb, they want to use the stovetop, so it doesn't really need kashering because right when you turn on the fire, that will self-kasher it as long as it's on for a few minutes. So you don't have to worry about that. But because you may burn the challah on the stovetop and then 5 minutes later try and cook something, then you don't want to take any risks. Even though if you cook something in a pot, it won't be treif either. But that's if we do bez the shema kasher shir, then we'll deal with that. But again, it's lechatchila. You don't want it on the grates. Now, if you're putting it into the oven, don't put it into the oven at the same time as the challah, because then the taste of the challah is going to get mixed in with the taste of the Hafrashas Challa is going to get mixed in with the taste of the challah, and then you might have a problem. If it was done in our types of ovens, again, this gets into a kashrus. This gets into a kashrus shear, not a Hafrashas Challa shear. But if it was done, then b'diavad it would still be okay. But don't do it lechatchila. If it's totally wrapped in foil, then you could do it even lechatchila. So if you totally wrap your Hafrashas Challa in foil and you want to put it in the oven at the same time, then that's fine. As long as it's wrapped, it doesn't have to be double wrapped in foil. Just one wrapping is enough. So again, don't do it lechatchila. If you did do it, then it, in all probability, will be okay. Depends if it's on the bottom of the oven, on the top of the oven, or whatever it is. It also should be burned as soon as possible. You don't want to be leaving dough around, and we'll get to this later on. But you leave dough around in the kitchen, and then somehow it ends up back in the challah, and then you have a big problem. So we'll discuss soon how to deal with that problem. But you don't want to do that. So you want to try and burn it ASAP. Children, this comes up a lot nowadays. People want to be mechanech their kids with doing Hafrashas Challa. Children themselves should not do the hafrasha. The parents should do it, or an adult should do it. The kid shouldn't make the bracha either. That should be up to the adult. I think we mentioned that last week. But the kid can help pull off the challah if that's what you want, but that they themselves shouldn't take it off. As it goes with checking eggs, kids shouldn't check eggs for blood spots, even though nowadays you really don't have to check eggs for blood spots. So really, kids can, but okay, but you should try. You shouldn't have kids do these things. If a boy from from 12 years old and up, and a girl from 11 years old and up did it, then it's fine. Again, still they shouldn't do it lechatchila, but if they did a year before their bar and bas mitzvah, then it's going to be okay. A goy should not be doing the Hafrashas Challa for you. Right? That's at least not lechatchila. A goy should not be doing it. I can't imagine too many people have goyim do that, because why should they? Why should they get the mitzvah? I mean, they're not getting a mitzvah anyways, but why should they take away the mitzvah from a yid? So a guy shouldn't do it. Dough of a guy, this does come up sometimes. Dough of a guy does not need Hafrashas Challa, even when it becomes a yid's. Right? So, meaning if for some reason you buy dough well, you can't really buy it if it doesn't have a hechsher. Meaning normally if you buy dough in a store, like pizza dough, pre-made dough, if it has a hechsher, then I'm assuming that hechsher means that the hechsher took off challah. But let's say the hechsher says we're giving you a hechsher, but we don't take off challah, which I don't know if there are companies like that or not. But or if somehow you know that you're getting kosher dough and it came from a guy, even if you buy more than 5 pounds of dough, it is not an issue, and you're allowed to just bake it as is. There's no even mitzvah to separate the dough if the dough belonged to a guy. Yeah. Okay. Yes. We said if you wrap the challah in foil, then you could put it directly on the grates. It's not a problem. Okay. Now getting back to. Okay. So that's basically the way you do Hafrashas Challa. Now we're going to get into all the situations where there's a lot of confusion with whether you're mechuyev to take off challah, and how does the challah combine, and how does it not combine? If you're making lots of challah, how much Hafrashas Challa you have to do? All the complicated situations, and it's a little bit confusing. I don't think it has to be confusing, but we'll try and clarify exactly the issues, and because unfortunately there's a lot of confusion over when something needs challah, when it doesn't need challah, and especially with these challah bakes. Unfortunately, there are women making these challah bakes, and in schools also they make challah with the kids and send it home, and they make a bracha, and a lot of times it may not even need challah at all, and a lot of times a bracha should not be made. And as we mentioned last week, making a bracha when it's not necessary is not a good thing. So therefore, it's very important to know these halachas. I did send out last week on the PDFs that I send out every once in a while. So to cover this share, I sent out the PDFs. I'll post it again later. But I'm basically going with the guidelines there. When I look at it tonight, it seems some of it maybe I didn't write so clear. If anybody sees the PDFs, or you can get it off the website, and you have anything to say that I should be putting in, or you have a way to reword it, I'm not going to be offended. We're all in this together. We got to try and make this as clear as we can for everybody. So if some of the sentences I see, I think maybe I didn't write so clear. So if you have any way or any ha'aras or any pointers, then please, I ask you to, mark it up and then send it to me if you can. Okay, so now, basically, as we know with all halacha, when you get the basic rule and you understand the basic rule, then you have a chance of understanding all the nuances. Meaning, I know in schools they teach I don't know if they still teach it, but in my days they taught the multiplication table. Right? So basically they have kids memorizing a multiplication table with the numbers going both ways, and that's how you memorize it, and then up until whatever number, 9 times 9 or whatever it is. But then once you get to higher numbers, you have no idea how to do it because you don't actually know how to do the math. You just memorize the multiplication table. So that's not, if you just hear halacha without knowing the the background to it, so it becomes the same thing, and you don't understand when the situation changes. So we'll just try and say the basic rule, and then hopefully that will give us some clarity. If not, and I'm not being clear, then please just post that if I should repeat myself, and I will gladly do that. So basically, when we're trying to combine doughs, the main rule that we have to have in mind and understand is if for whatever reason you don't want those doughs to be combined, then they don't combine. For example, and this comes up a lot, and unfortunately, a lot of women don't understand this. If I'm taking 5 pounds of dough, which we said last week is chayiv and challah according to all opinions with a bracha, but I'm going to take 2 pounds of dough and to make a cake, like cinnamon cakes. I think cinnamon or I don't remember which type. Kokosh cake. That's it. Kokosh cake. Thank you. Kokosh cake. I have my mother here to make sure I behave myself. Okay. So Baruch Hashem. All right. So you're taking 2 pounds to make kokosh cake, 3 pounds to make challah. There's no bracha because you need to have 5 pounds of something that you want to combine. Right now, since you don't want these doughs to combine, then that's considered as if they're 2 totally separate doughs. So again, if you're making 5 pounds of challah, 5 pounds of dough, 3 pounds of challah, and 2 pounds of kokosh, or whatever the numbers are, then since you don't want them to combine, therefore they don't combine, right? If you're going to have on a topping on one challah that's going to be a sugar topping, and on another challah it's going to be raisin topping or anything of those type, then it's considered like you don't want it to combine. And since you don't want it to combine, therefore it's not considered one big dough, and you don't separate challah, right? So again, that's if you are baking 5 pounds and you're splitting up the 5 pounds. If you are baking 10 pounds and 5 pounds is going to be kokosh cake, 5 pounds is going to be challah, then obviously there's enough in each one to make a brachas, and then you're okay. Same thing if it would be 7 pounds, 5 pounds of challah, 2 pounds for kokosh cake, then of course you would make a bracha on that. Again, it's only if you're trying to combine doughs that each one onto itself does not have enough to combine. I hope that's clear. All right. Another case is when you're baking with a bunch of kids, right? Or you're at a challah bake, and each person is going to take home a challah in raw, and they're going to take home I don't know how many pounds go, how many challahs you get, but let's say you're going to have a 1 pound per challah, right? So since it's being split up, people to take home in dough form, therefore they don't combine, and nobody's having a shir challah. Not only do you not make a bracha, you don't even need to separate challah off of it. So an example, you make a challah bake in your house with a few girls, right? Which is a wonderful thing. But you're baking 5 pounds of 5 pounds of challah, 5 pounds of flour, and each girl is going to take home that challah. Then that's not Hafrashas Challa. It's not required. So therefore, that is a problem. Now, if you are going to bake it in your house all at the same time, and it belongs to you, and then you're going to give it out to the girls, then that's fine. Meaning, if you are having a few girls over and you're going to make a challah bake because you want the bracha and the schusim, etc., then what should be done is obviously only one person can make the bracha of Hafrashas Challa, and that would be the owner, like we discussed last week, because it's their mitzvah. So I don't know how you're going to include all the girls exactly in it, but if you want to make that bracha, it has to belong to one person, and then that one person will bake it, and then when you give it out, once it's baked, then that's fine. But if they just all you're gonna take off challah and give it each one to bring home to bake, which is very common in playgroups and in schools where they get even 10 pounds of dough, and each girl's getting to make a challah, and they're bringing it home raw, and they make a bracha of Hafrashas Challa. That is incorrect. That is not the proper thing to do, because it doesn't even need challah. If they're baking it in school, then yes, then you do make a bracha. It sounds technical, but that is the difference. Meaning, when it's being baked and you want it to stay together, then they all combined for one shear. However, if you don't want it to stay together, because you want each girl to take it home themselves, then you can't combine them unless it's after it's baked. Once it's baked, it's fine. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so the frozen we'll get to. Let's see. Can I be Hafrashas Challa? Then give dough to family or friends who live elsewhere to shave and bake in their homes. No, you cannot do that. That's exactly what we just mentioned. If it's being sent home as dough, then it does not combine. The eitzah, if you want to do that, I don't know if this is a practical eitzah or not, but if you did want to take home Hafrashas Challa send home Hafrashas Challa for the friends, then I would tell you to do is bake 10 pounds, and then keep 5 for yourself, and then you make the Hafrashas Challa on that, and then send the rest home to the family and friends. That's okay, right? But if it's just going to be the 5 pounds and then split it, then you can't do it. Okay, frozen we're going to get back to in a minute. If you mix, as a question, if you mix all the ingredients into one bowl, if you divide it into smaller portions, you don't need to separate. Well, you do need to if it's all one type. I'm not sure what you're asking. If it's all going to be one type of challah, then you do, as long as you're baking it yourself and you're not sending it to other people in dough form. I think. If I'm not getting that correct, then please repost it. Yeah, so different toppings, if you're going to put on the toppings after it's baked, which I don't know if that's done. I don't think that's done. Then it will combine. But if you're going to put the toppings on, then before it's baked, which is the usual, then you don't want those challahs. The rule is what is in your das, what's in your mind. Do you want these? Would you have any problem with these challahs combining? If you have no problem with the challahs combining, then you make the bracha. If you do have a problem with the challahs combining, then you don't. So if you're going to put on different toppings, you don't want all those challahs to combine, because if they do, you won't have your different types of challah. Right? So then you are, then you're not Hafrashas Challa. Yes, if you do half dough of challah and half the kokosh, you're not even mafresh. I mean, you could be mafresh, but certainly you can't make a bracha. And if it's potter, then there's no mitzvah. There's no mitzvah. Maybe it's even baltashas to separate and dispose of. Unfortunately, a lot of women don't know this. I wish there was as many women on this week as there were last week. Hopefully they'll go on the website and watch this. If not, yell it out from the rooftops. But that is the din. Yes, the owner can allow somebody to make the bracha on their behalf, but then that person's got to do the separating of the challah, because preferably that person should do the separating. So you're just giving up your mitzvah, which is a very nice thing. You can give up a mitzvah, but I'm not so sure that's the right thing to do, to give up a mitzvah. Okay, so again, the rule is that if you don't want them to combine, then they don't combine. But again, this is only when we're talking about trying to combine challah or dough, that each one is less than a shear, right? Meaning I have 5 pounds of dough and I'm making a bunch of different challahs. So, but if they're meaning different challahs, meaning they're the same challahs, just a bunch of I guess I'm sorry for saying it confusing. Meaning you're making a few challahs of the same type. So then you want it all to combine. So then you're fine. You make a bracha. But when you don't want it to combine, then they don't combine. However, if you have, let's say, you're making 10 pounds of challah, right? But that's a lot of challah to knead it and to deal with it. So you're making two separate batches of 5 and 5. Then they do combine, as long as they're in the same room. Really, they combine, and you don't have to take off challah from each. It's a common question. This question, you don't have to take off challah from each batch. Then even if each batch is going to be their own, meaning you're making a 5 pounds of kokosh and 5 pounds of challah, then you don't have to take off. Then they will combine. And you don't have to take off from each one. Certainly, if they're going to both be challah, you don't have to take off from each one. Now, can you take off from each one? No, you can't even take. Meaning, if you want to do two separate mitzvahs, then you can't. If you have you and a friend, and each one is going to take home the 5 pounds, the other one's going to take home, and then those are two different people's challah, then that's fine. You can make, each one can make a bracha. But if it's your own, then they just have to be in the same room, and that's enough. Right? However, if you have them in separate buckets or pots or whatever it is that you're using, then they don't combine. Then they don't combine, because again, that's like considered totally separate. So therefore, since they're totally separate, if you want to only take off challah from one, then you have to make them touching. So again, there's a difference in halacha between small amounts that you're trying to gather into 5 pounds and 5 pounds together with another 5 pounds. There's a different halacha, right? There they combine as long as they're in the same room. But if they're in separate utensils, meaning if you have a pile of 5 pounds of dough on your counter, and next to it you have another 5 pounds, or even on a different counter you have 5 pounds, then they combine. You don't have to put them together or anything like that. If you want to, but if they're in separate utensils, then they do have to be touching. I think I made a mistake before. I think I said, let's say you're making 5 pounds kokosh and 5 pounds of regular challah, then they also only have to take one, but they take off from one, yeah, but they would have to be touching. In that case, they'd have to be touching, because again, they're two separate entities. It could be even there are opinions that say that you should take off from each one. I don't remember now. I have to double check on that. Yeah, fine. So that's the difference between that. Now going back to the original, where you're trying to combine small amounts of dough. So again, I don't think this is so pertinent, because most of the time you bake your dough and you just take off your challah, and then you separate the doughs into individual challahs, right? But let's say you decided one for one day you're only making a pound or two of challah. So you take a pound or two, and then while it's on the counter and it's in the dough form, you say, oh, you know what, I'm going to do another pound or two, another pound or two. So now you have the challahs all kneaded and braided and ready to go, and then you realize, 1 second, I have 5 pounds here. So now what am I going to do about this? So there, if you want to take off challah, you're going to have to do one of these following options. Either you put the dough together and they have to be stuck together, meaning you'd have to either take them out of the trays, or if they're in the trays, you'd have to like bend the trays somehow and let them touch, but they actually have to be stuck together, not the whole challah, just a part of it. Meaning, in order to make it, you'd have to make it into one. They have to be one continuous dough, right? Or you can take it and put them all into a bag, or you can cover them on the top and then the bottom, and then they're going to be combined, and then you'll take off challah. Right? Again, I hope that's clear. But basically, again, I don't think the scenario plays itself out too often. But again, you started to bake one or two challahs, then you decided, which was not a shear, and then you decide you're going to bake more, and then you realize that you need to take off challah. So then, what you do is, well, if you don't want to do this and you don't want to take off challah, so fine, each one is considered separate entity, and each one is a separate shear. Then you don't have to. You don't have to take off challah. But if you choose to do that, then you'd either have to stick them together, or put them into a bag, or cover them on the top and bottom, and then you'd be able to do a Hafrashas Challa. This does come up if you forgot to take off challah, which we'll get to in a couple of minutes. Fine. So let's see some questions here. I don't know when you're saying put the toppings on later. Is later when? After they're baked or before they're baked? I don't know if that's, I'm not sure what that question is. Oh, I see. You followed up. You have 5 pounds, and then you do hafrasha. Later, before you bake it, you put on the toppings on. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's an issue. That's an issue because you don't want these. You don't want them to combine. Oh well, the truth is, it's a mach with the toppings. See, if you're putting sugar into challah, like you're making an egg challah, and or what's it called now? Water challah, egg challah, then and one's a sugar challah, or those type of the or sourdough, let's say, then those don't combine. The toppings is a disagreement. So if you already separated the challah and you made the bracha, then certainly you don't have a problem. You can decide to put on the different toppings. That's fine. Whether you're going to if you lechatchila know you're going to put on different toppings, so then that would be a shaila over whether you do it. Meaning, if you're taking off the challah initially and you want to just separate it, then that's fine. And later on you decide you want to put on different toppings, that's fine. You don't have to stop yourself from putting on the toppings. If you know lechatchila that you're going to put on separate toppings, then that's not so simple. But in that situation, I would tell you like this, and I hope this is not confusing, but we said last week that really 2.5, 2 2 3/4 of a pound is really enough for challah. We just don't want to make a bracha. So in this situation, as long as 3 pounds, let's round it off, 3 pounds of challah is going to have the same topping, then for sure you can make a bracha on that. I hope that's clear. Meaning, it's a shaila whether putting on toppings is considered separate challah or not, because essentially the challahs are the same. It's just the toppings are a little different. So that's the question: is that considered whether you want it to be combined or not combined? So as long as you have 3 pounds of challah going to be one type of topping, then you can make a bracha, and that's not an issue. Okay, I hope that's clear. Now, again, when you're taking 5 pounds and then another 5 pounds of challah, if you're baking it at a different time, like you baked 5 pounds and then you decide to bake another 5 pounds, then you make a separate bracha. If it's at the same time, then you don't need to make a separate bracha. And if it's in separate pots, 5 pounds in one pot, 5 pounds in another pot, then if you want to do one Hafrashas Challa, then you have to touch the pots together, or cover them with a bag or something like that. Okay, so now going back to when you're giving them out to play groups or those type of thing, again, if the challah is being given out in the dough form, there is no Hafrashas Challa whatsoever. Right? If it's going to be given out after it's baked, then there is Hafrashas Challa with a bracha. Right? So then, of course, the big shaila that comes up a lot is you're baking 5 pounds of challah, and some you're going to freeze for later, for next week or something like that. So do you make a bracha? Do you not make a bracha? This is a big disagreement in the Paiskim, whether you have to separate or not. And many say you do separate, because essentially it's the same challah for you. You want it all together. You're just going to freeze the dough, right? then if you're going to bake the challahs now and then freeze some, that's not a shayla. That you separate the challah with a bracha. Again, if you're going to freeze the challah, you're going to freeze the challah when it's in its challah form, meaning you baked everything, you baked 5 pounds, put it in the freezer, no question, you make a bracha, right? Same way if you baked a lot of challah and you give it out, right? Then, well, let's hold off on that for a minute. But again, if you bake challah and you put it in the freezer, that's not a problem. We're talking about if you take some of the dough and you're going to freeze it for later, for a different week or any time later, there's a big shiloh whether you take off challah or not. So, like we said last week, when you have this situation, you have a machlokes, so we're going to be strict in both directions. And we're going to say, take off the challah and don't make a bracha. That's what most poskim say. Again, if you're baking challah, if you're taking off, you're making 5 pounds of dough, and you're going to freeze some of the dough for later, the preferable way to do it is to separate the challah, but don't make a bracha. There are those that say you could make a bracha. So if someone chooses to go with that opinion, then it's not a problem. Although it's, again, once you have a safek brachas, you don't want to necessarily do that because you don't want to get into a safek bracha situation, right? Yeah. So then there was a question. I think I mixed it up. If you're going to bake all the dough yourself and then you give it out, yes, then you, like for mishloach manos or to children or to whatever it is, friends, then yes, there you do, because at the time of the baking you want all the challah, right? So therefore you don't have to worry about that, and you can just separate the challah and you give it out. Okay. So again, with the frozen, there's a lot of confusion with it. So, but the best is to take off the challah and then without a bracha. Or if you really want to make the bracha, so then bake the challahs and then freeze the challahs. But that's the best way. Although again, there are many opinions that say you could separate the challah and make a bracha because it's for yours for later, and it's not like you're giving it out. So, but again, that's okay. Just say it's probably better not probably. You should not make the bracha. If you want to keep it in your refrigerator until the next morning, as long as you're not freezing it, then it's fine. That's considered. It doesn't have to be baked all in one big baking, because I guess whatever, for convenience sake, you're not baking it till later, so that's fine. But here, when you're frozen, it's a little bit different because you're putting it away for long term, right? So that's that. Now, if you forget to take off challah, get this question a lot. You forgot to take off challah from your bread, and then you only remembered after it was baked. So you still have to take off challah. What you do is you put the challah in, you put them all together, right? And again, if each one is smaller than the shear, which is probable, then the best thing to do is put it into a bag. The best thing is a garbage bag, obviously a clean garbage bag. You put it into a garbage bag, so now it's all together, and you take off the challah, right? You take off challah from one. Yes, you will not be able to make use it for lechem mishnah, that particular challah. That's going to be a loss. Yeah. But again, if it was baked and you realize that you didn't take off challah, the safest is to just put it into a bag, and then you make the bracha and you separate the challah. But if for those that add, I don't think we discussed this before, some say the bracha is Ashek L'Shon says it's one of Hafrashas Challa, and some add Hafrashas Challa min ha'isa, which means to separate challah from dough. If you do use that lashon of min ha'isa, and you're taking it off after you already baked it, then it's no longer min ha'isa, because it's no longer dough. So then you don't say min ha'isa, then just say the bracha of the Hafrashas Challa. Then you take it off, and then you can burn that challah the same way that you do with the dough. Right now, let's say Friday night you forget, and you remember. Well, let's say Friday night you're sitting there by the Suda, and you say, "Oops, I didn't take off challah." So now, what do? So this last week we discussed that in Eretz Yisrael it's different than in Chutz La'aretz. So we have that same here. There's a different. This is where it manifests itself. In Eretz Yisrael, you can't use the challah, but in Chutz La'aretz, which we said is the Rabbanon, so then you're allowed to leave over. It's a Rabbanon on a Rabbanon. What you do is you can continue eating the challah. Again, this does not apply to Eretz Yisrael, but in Chutz La'aretz, you continue eating the challah, and then you leave over a piece of the challah until Motzei Shabbos, and then on Motzei Shabbos you take a piece off of the leftover challah, and you use that as the Hafrashas Challa. Again, if you remember on Shabbos that you didn't take off challah, so you can get in Chutz La'aretz, you can continue eating the challah. You just leave over a piece of challah for the end, and then you take off from that piece. You separate some challah, and then you're fine. There were actually some gedolim. I don't know if Yisrael Reisman, that Rav Pam he was always concerned with the hashkachas, whether he did Hafrashas Challa or not. So let's say he was eating matzah, he always took off a little piece. He was a kohen, right? But he always took off a little piece just to make sure, and didn't eat it, just to make sure that challah, obviously without a bracha, to make sure that challah was separated. So so that's basically what you do if you remember on Shabbos. Okay, again, only in Chutz La'aretz, not in Eretz Yisrael. When you're taking off challah, which I don't think this is too common, but if you baked a lot of cake with a liquid batter, I think this came up last week. You baked a lot of cake with a liquid batter. Now, obviously, you can't take off challah with a liquid batter, but you'd probably have to be baking a lot of cake in order to have enough 5 pounds of flour. But if theoretically that's what you were doing, something like that, maybe from Mishloach Manos, then what you do is you bake the cakes, and then once the cakes are baked, that's when you take off the challah, the same way we said that you do if you forgot to take off challah when it was baked already. If you're not sure if you separated, then you don't have to separate. It would be a suffix of the Rabbanon, and you would not have to separate. All right, but that brings us into another situation which is not so common, but it happens often enough that it would be worth mentioning it. Let's say your challah dough fell back in. You separated some challah, and then it fell back into the mixture. Now, this is not simple. You can't just take off a piece. If you see the piece that fell in and you see it clearly, then you could take it out. But if you don't see it, which is usually the case, or if you know you didn't burn the challah and you can't find the challah, then the assumption is that you put the challah back in, so now you have a problem. So if there's 100 times more dough in the mixture than the piece of challah that you separated, then it's considered batel and it's no problem. Right? Meaning, obviously, you have to take it off again, then it's no problem. As far as I understand, it's very rare to have 100 times more the piece than you separated. Meaning, again, you separated a piece, let's say a handful, and then it fell back in. If there's 100 handfuls of dough left in the pot, then it will be batel, and then you could take off challah again. But if there isn't, which is the norm, now the whole thing is considered asur to eat. So basically, what you have to do is you have to do hataras nadarim on your challah separation. Okay, which basically means you have to get a bezdin together. Family it has to be males over bar mitzvah, and they could be related to each other. So you have to gather the 3 men, and you say to them that the challah fell back in, and I want to make that challah nullified, and I want to make it like I'm being mata the nether, and then you mata the nether, and then you separate the challah again with a bracha. If you don't have 3 men around, so then you cannot send a kid or a cousin or a sibling to go be mata nether for you. The only one you could do is you're allowed to send a husband. A husband can go be mata nether on behalf of the wife, and it could be that really it's his dough, so he's really being mata nether for himself. But he basically has to go gather 3 men, and I'm sorry, you can't gather them. He has to just walk over to 3 men and say to them, I need you guys to be mata my nether, and then they say mutalach mutalach, and then you're okay. Right? Meaning only a husband can be the shliach, and that's it. Okay, can 3 men do it over Zoom? No, you cannot do it over Zoom. It has to be done in person. During Corona, they allowed Hataras Nadarim on Zoom. Some poskim allowed it on Zoom, meaning for to be mafker things, meaning when people couldn't go to the mikvahs because the mikvahs were closed. So if people got new pots and pans, and there was a mikvah, so some poskim allowed you to use a bezdin on Zoom in order to say that it's hefker, and therefore since it's hefker, it doesn't need tefillah because it's not owned by a yid. Okay, but that's a whole different shmooze. Yeah, so that's basically what you would do if the challah dough fell back in. Again, not necessarily so common, but that's the again. So the two, what they say, b'di'evet situations are if you already baked the challah and you realize that you didn't take off challah, so then you put it all together. The simplest thing is put it all together in a bag, and then you take off of one piece, and then you separate it, and you make the bracha, and you get rid of it, and then you're fine. And if you remember on Shabbos, then leave over a piece of challah, and then you're going to take off a challah from that piece of challah if you're in Chutz La'aretz. If your dough got mixed back in, if there's 100 times more dough than the Hafrashas Challa, then it's batel, and you just take it off again. If it's not, which is usually the case, then you have to be mater neder by gathering 3 men over 13. They could be relatives, and you re-separate with a bracha. Okay, so that, I think that pretty much covers it. If I'm not remembering anything, then please post it now. If not, I'll just a quick review. So if you're burning it on a stovetop or in the oven, then put it into foil because you don't want the taste transferring. If you're going, the best is to burn it. If you're not going to burn it, and it only has to be burnt to make sure nobody will eat it, that's enough. If you're not going to burn it, then separate less than a kazayas. Non-Jews, meaning goyim, should not separate challah. Children should not separate challah. And then I think I didn't say this. Some say harezu challah after they separate the challah. Some do that. Once the challah is burnt, then you just can throw it in the garbage, no problem. You wrap it up and throw it in the garbage. Again, combining doughs. If you're trying to combine doughs, each one less than the shir challah, and you want to combine them, then they either should be touching, meaning sticking together, or put it onto a tray, or covered on the top and the bottom, putting it into a bag, and then they're going to combine. You can only combine if the doughs are all going to be going to the same person, or for yourself, or you don't want those to be separated. If you want those to be separated, for example, some are going to be cake and some are going to be challah, some is going to be dairy, some is going to be parav, or anything like that, then they cannot combine at all. If you have dough more than 5 pounds, 2 batches more than 5 pounds, and as long as they're in the same room, really they combine, unless they're in separate utensils, in which case you'd have to touch them together if you want to take off one challah, one hafrashas challah instead of 2. When you're baking challah to give out, So as long as you're baking them yourself and then you're giving them out after they're baked, then you make the bracha. If you're giving it out in the dough form, which is very common in playgroups and in schools and challah bakes, then you should not make a bracha unless somebody's actually keeping 5 pounds of it. Right? I think the best way to do a challah bake, if you're doing it, is each person should be making 5 pounds of challah. In which case, then you make a bracha. But if 2-3 women are sharing 5 pounds, and they're going to each one take home the dough, then no Hafrashas Challa is necessarily, and certainly a bracha is not necessary. Frozen dough, meaning you're freezing part of it, part of the dough, then you should preferably not make a bracha. Although there are many opinions that say you can separate with a bracha, it's not preferable. You have to separate, that's for sure. But whether you should make a bracha or not is really debatable. So it's, to be safe, it's better not to. And that's basically it. Okay, so let me just read off some questions and then we'll stop there. Correct. Yeah, on Shabbos you don't have to put the doughs. You don't have to separate the doughs. You don't have to put the doughs together, but you do have to have in mind. Meaning, you should cut off a piece of. I don't know if I said this clearly. If you realize Friday night, then you cut off a piece of the challah and put it away. And from that piece, you're going to be separating a piece. And you don't leave it on the table because you might forget. Cut off a piece of the challah and put it away. And then after Shabbos, you're going to take off challah from that piece of challah. All right. Okay, so then if somebody made multiple batches of pizza dough, each batch was baked separately, realize that was more than a share. So then you would take it and put it together, and then take off. You put it together and take off challah. That's if I'm understanding the question correctly, right? You just I mean, you're cooking the pizza dough with the cheese or without the cheese. Meaning, if it's different toppings, or if it's all the same pizza, then I would say you just put it together. I don't know if it's easy to put it together in a bag, but you'd cover it on the bottom, cover it on the top. Then you would separate the challah. If you're making mafresh out of so the 40 days. I'm sorry, somebody asked me to discuss it. I apologize for not discussing, but I guess we'll discuss it now. Thank you for that reminder. Yeah. So if all the pizzas are the same, then you put it together and then take off challah after that. Yeah, just like if you baked dough, then you take off the challah after that. If you're being mafresh out of bracha, can it be counted towards a group of 40 women baking for a schus or something? That is a good question, because a lot of times when you're not making a bracha, that's because it could be there are opinions that say that you're not required to separate challah. Meaning, we're going to paskin with the majority opinions that say you should separate challah, but because of the bracha, we don't want you to make a bracha levatala. So therefore, you don't make a bracha. So I would say that it's fine, even if you don't make a bracha. But probably the women in the group have to decide if they want somebody taking off challah that needs a bracha according to all opinions. So again, I would say that it's okay, but really you have to discuss it with the group and see what they say. Now, this whole concept of the 40 women baking challah, I tried to look into it, what the source is. I'm not exactly sure. The source for 40 days nishmas, 40 days, whatever, going to the kaisel, that comes from Moshe Rabbeinu going up for 40 days and 40 nights to get the Torah. That seems to be the source for the 40. But where the source comes from with the 40 women baking and et cetera, I don't know. I'm sorry. I wish I knew exactly the source for that. I don't know. But there is a concept that if people do that, then it becomes some sort of schus. It certainly can't hurt. But it's very hard to pin down halachas of these whole 40-day nishmas. Do I have to say it at night? Do I have to say it during the day? These type of things. Then it's unclear because it's not halacha, which is maybe worthwhile just to say that. that it's nice for segulas, etc., etc., but it's certainly not halacha. So it's not halacha. It's very hard to pin down. So I essentially tell women when they have these questions is that the group has to decide: are they going to be finished altogether by night with the nishmas, or they're going to say it only during the day? And with the challah, come up with your own standard that everybody's going to have to keep, and try to keep to those standards. Yeah, okay, another question here. Can the names of students be on the pan of challahs? Yeah, that's fine. As long as when the baking, because bottom line is if as long as if one gets mixed up, then what the kid will take home a challah. So then that's really, it's okay. If each one's baking their own type of challah, then maybe you don't want them to combine. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. But if they're all basically the same challah, you just want to know each one wants to take home the one that they specifically needed. That I believe is fine, because if it gets mixed up, they'll be okay taking a different one. I'm assuming if they each one put on their own, if they braided it differently, and I'm not sure. That's a good question. If you can follow up with me during the week if you need an answer to that question. Okay, I guess we'll stop here. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Next week I'm out of town, so I won't be able to give share. And the next week is Shabbos Hanukkah, which we don't usually have because the Hanukkah party is very hard to get people. I wonder if we should have even had it tonight. I didn't realize we had the shopping night is tonight. Yeah, okay, so let's just say a parak tilim together, if you don't mind. And we'll say Achenu. I'm going to say Pei Gimel, which is the parak about Yidden being attacked by Goyim, and davening to Hashem for that. So, again, Kapitel Pei Gimel. Okay. Shir Mizmor La'asaf. Elim Adam Ilach Al Techarash Al Tishkoit El Ki Hinei Oyevecha Yamayim Mechsanecha Nasurash Al Amcha Yarim Usoid Nisayot Al Tzvonecha Amaru L'chuv and Achilim V'doi V'lo Yizach Hashem Yisrael Oid Ki Noyet Ulev Yaakov Alecha Bris Yichroisu Alei Edem Yishmeilim Moyov Agrim Keval V'amoin V'amolik Peleshes and Yosh Vitzor Kam Asher Nilva Imam HaYisrael V'nei Loitzela Aselim Kimidyon Kisisro Kiyavim B'nachal Kishon Nishmedu V'yendor HaYudan L'adamah Shisema Nidivema Ka'ire V'chizei V'chizevach V'chtzamuna Kol Mesichema Asher Amru Nirshalanu Es Nois Elihim Elihai Shisema Kagala Kekashet Pnei Ruach Keish Tevar Yar V'chalava Telahet Harim Kein Terdefim V'sarecha V'sufasacha Sivalem Malef Neim Kolim V'vakshu Shimcha Adonai Yevoshu V'yibolu Adeyad V'yachberu V'yevedu V'yedu Ki Ata Shimcha Adonai L'vadecha El Yoin HaKol Haaretz Achinu Kol Beis Yisrael and the Sunnah Batzora Shivya, and the Vema Yom Vema Yivashon, Makan Yirachim Aliyeh, Yetzim Etzal Levacha, Umeyafela La'ira, Umeshiva Legula, Hashtal Ba'agolov Zman Kariv, and Emar Omein. We should only hear Basuras Tavis and Hatzlacha to everybody. Good talk. Yeah.